Alright, so we're back, of course, to talk about some Square Enix, and we are revisiting the topic of Sony potentially acquiring Square Enix. That's something we talked about a couple months back whenever Square Enix sold off their Western studios. This was, of course, Crystal Dynamics, Eidos Montreal, and Square Enix Montreal, which has a bunch of different IPs under, like Thief and Legacy of Kain, but the biggest one being, of course, Tomb Raider. And these studios were sold for what many believe to be a very, very low amount at $300 million, which it's got to be. Between like the franchises, the IPs that they got, but also the studios themselves and the staff that they acquired and everything, they got a hell of a steal at $300 million. Hell, when it comes to the Tomb Raider franchise alone, when it comes to the mainline entries in the series, they've never sold under 1 million copies. Like there's only a couple that are 1 point whatever million. But besides those, like the lowest is Angel of Darkness, like 2.5 million. And that was a shitty fucking game, and it still sold well. Now, I don't know what the sales are versus the budget of these games, but in terms of units, they sold quite a bit. And hell, if you even just look at like the last 3 entries on the list, the most recent Tomb Raider games, like those have sold over 30 million units combined. That's crazy numbers, man. And hell, just those last 3 Tomb Raider games alone, pushing, 30 million units sold, like they had to have made well over $300 million by themselves. Obviously, there's budget and marketing and stuff like that goes into making these games, but the point is, they've made a shit ton of money off Tomb Raider. And they got that, plus all these other IPs, multiple studios, and a shit ton of staff for a measly, in the grand scheme of things, $300 million. It's crazy. Like, Square Enix couldn't get rid of it faster. Now, part of the discussion back then that I don't believe we touched on with my previous video was that maybe part of why they're selling these Western studios is to fund this NFT bullshit that they're doing, and that's possibly true. I don't know if we'll ever have confirmation on that, but we talked recently about them getting into the NFT shit with the FF7 25th anniversary stuff. So it's certainly possible that could be part of it. But one of the other things that we touched on is that they might have been selling off these kind of sort of bloat studios, if you want to call it that. They're not the big name studios out there, to potentially gear up for an acquisition from Sony. That's something we touched on in the previous video, and what we're going to look at today seems like maybe that is the case. And I don't mean to use the term bloat in like a negative way, though it does sound like that, but if somebody's trying to acquire Square Enix, that's probably just for the major IPs like Kingdom Hearts and Final Fantasy and shit like that, and everything else is just kind of extra, but if they can get rid of these other studios, then maybe they can get a better acquisition price or something, I don't know. They can negotiate more since they don't have as much bloat. So what we have today is an interview with GameIndustry.biz with the founder of Eidos Montreal, Stephane D'Astous, I think is how you say his last name. It's pretty interesting to read if you want like kind of more behind the scenes stuff about what maybe led up to Square Enix selling off all these other studios. It's also worth noting that he's actually not a part of Eidos Montreal anymore. He left in like 2013, so he's been gone for a while, but his take on this is kind of interesting because he was obviously the founder of the goddamn studio. But there's one particular part of the interview that's kind of making the rounds, making the headlines. It's where he kind of weighs in on the potential of Sony acquiring Square Enix and his thoughts on why maybe they sold off the studios because of that acquisition potentially. So he says, if I read between the lines, Square Enix Japan was not as committed as we hoped initially. And there are rumors, obviously, that with all these activities of mergers and acquisitions, that Sony would really like to have Square Enix within their wheelhouse. I heard rumors that Sony said they're really interested in Square Enix Tokyo, but not the rest. So I think Matsuda-san put it like a garage sale. So essentially what we just talked about and what we talked about a few months ago, using the garage sale comparison, you go up to a garage sale, you're trying to buy a specific item, but the person's trying to sell you everything they have. So maybe what they decided to do, since Sony was potentially interested in just Square Enix Japan, Square Enix Tokyo, they maybe decided to sell off their Western studios at what seems to be a pretty major loss, just to make themselves a little more appealing to Sony. Then again, as I say that, they're willing to sell all that off for such a low amount in the grand scheme of things. Like, why wouldn't they just sell it to Sony? You can't tell me like Sony wouldn't be interested in acquiring all those IPs and studios and staff and everything for $300 million. Like, that's not that large of an amount. And the thing is, too, if like they were going to acquire Square Enix, it'd be in the billions, right? It'd be probably somewhere around what Bethesda got acquired for, or ZeniMax Online, the $7 billion range, maybe a little more, a little less, whatever the case. And if you're already spending that kind of money, fuck it, why not just do another $300 million, or whatever they would sell Tomb Raider and everything else for. So this is pretty interesting, so I figured we'd read it as well. That D'Astous suggests may explain the $300 million price tag for 3 AAA studios and a host of long-running IP, including the blockbuster Tomb Raider franchise. By comparison, Embracer purchased Gearbox in a deal worth $1.3 billion. They have about 1,000 staff, Eidos has about 1,000, D'Astous says. They have basically Borderlands and others, and Eidos has 5 times the IPs, so why 4 times less? I guess there weren't a lot of key people interested, and it shows the health of the value of the potential of Eidos, unfortunately. So I thought that was pretty interesting because either I completely missed the Gearbox acquisition or just forgot about it, but it was the same people that acquired Gearbox that acquired all these studios from Square Enix, and they got it for a hell of a lot less. And while Gearbox has like a handful of IPs, right, but in the modern era, it'd really just be about the Borderlands series. Half-Life is obviously huge and popular, but they haven't really done anything with that IP in quite some time. They did a VR game somewhat recently, but for the most part, they've not done anything with Half-Life. So if you're buying Gearbox, you're pretty much buying Borderlands. So I get the comparison that he's making here because they have similar studios. Like I said, Eidos has about 1,000, so does Gearbox. The thing is, Square Enix didn't just sell off Eidos, right? They sold off Crystal Dynamics and also Square Enix Montreal. So they sold off multiple studios, multiple IPs, a backlog of like 50-something games, a bunch of staff for like a fourth of what Gearbox was bought for. It's crazy. But as he also said with this quote, that maybe people are looking towards the future for Eidos Montreal. And the last two games were, we'll say, not well received, sort of. Like Shadow of the Tomb Raider is still sold, like we looked at earlier, almost 9 million, but it wasn't as well reviewed as the previous two Tomb Raiders. But the last game they put out was Guardians of the Galaxy, which I've only ever heard good things about, right? Nobody's ever trashed that game. But Square Enix were the ones that were saying that it didn't do as well as they were expecting. So maybe in Square Enix's eyes, they just wanted to get rid of Eidos Montreal because they weren't making the numbers or performing as good as they wanted to. I don't know. The last couple releases, they weren't satisfied with, whatever the case. Now, on the prospect of Sony acquiring Square Enix, I mean, we don't need to go super in-depth on it. We talked about it with the previous video 2 months ago. You can watch that video if you want to. But essentially, when it comes to at least the Final Fantasy series, for several years now, they've had a lot of exclusives, right? 12 Zodiac Age, Final Fantasy 14 currently, when it comes to consoles, is only on PlayStation. Remake, obviously Part 1 and Part 2, Rebirth now, as we know, it's PlayStation exclusives. Final Fantasy 16 is going to be a PS5 exclusive. And then, hell, looking a little more into it, man, even something like Dragon Quest 11, when that came out in like 2017, it came out on PlayStation 4, but also 3DS, but still it wasn't on Xbox. It's still, technically, when it comes to a full-blown console, not a handheld, a PlayStation exclusive. And looking even more into it, something like Nier Automata was also PS4 exclusive for like a year. Because with the last video, we only talked about really the Final Fantasy franchise. But really, Square Enix has kind of sporadically been PlayStation exclusive for quite some time. And more than likely, something like a Dragon Quest 12, which we know is coming out at some point, could potentially be like PS4/PS5 exclusive. Timed exclusive, full exclusive, I don't entirely know. So if they already have all these games and IPs from Square Enix that are either timed exclusives or full-on exclusives, then why the hell not just acquire them? It just makes the most sense. That's more or less the video, my dudes. I don't know how much more we can add to this, especially since it's something we talked about not too long ago. But I did want to read over this because people were talking about it. And Stephane is a bit of an insider, right? He was obviously the founder of Eidos Montreal. So his thoughts and opinion on why they're maybe acquired and the fact that he had heard a rumor about Sony wanting to acquire specifically Square Enix Tokyo, I think is kind of important. It's probably the most substantial thing we've had about this because they've been talking about Sony is acquiring Square Enix for a long time, right? It's been a rumor for a while, but the fact that he's a bit of an insider and he has also heard that rumor maybe adds a little bit of credibility to it. But of course, passing off to you guys, it's been a few months since we last talked about this, so what are your thoughts currently on the idea of Sony acquiring Square Enix? I mean, again, a good chunk of their games, at least the main ones that I'm aware of, outside of maybe Kingdom Hearts, have been PlayStation exclusive anyways, even if it's just for like a year or more. So there's not really a change if they were to acquire, unless they just make certain games full-on exclusive. Either way, that's the video, my dudes. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, give a thumbs up. Subscribe to if you guys aren't interested in more Square Enix acquisition news, I suppose. Turn on notifications. Follow me on Twitter, #AYT. I'm a Discord. Links to social networks are in the description. And in the outro. Later, guys.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Logain or leave it like Cobain.